Vladimir Putin decided to rattle nuclear weapons today. The Kremlin responded to United States President Donald Trump's decision to postpone the summit with Vladimir Putin in Budapest by showcasing nuclear weapons. Today, the Russians launched a YARS intercontinental ballistic missile, which carries nuclear weapons and can reach the United States of America. Well, and Vladimir Putin boasted that today there was a training exercise of the strategic forces of the Russian Federation using all components of the nuclear triad. On the same day, the State Duma of the Russian Federation loudly declared that if the West rejects Vladimir Putin's terms, Russia is ready for war with NATO. But today there was also another important episode of nuclear threats that few people noticed. The fact is that at the same time as the Russian nuclear drills, North Korea also launched at least one unidentified ballistic missile toward the East Sea. In doing so, the two dictatorial regimes hinted that they are ready to act together against the West. But it's amusing to watch the Russian nuclear drills, considering that dictator Putin himself got scared today and refused to go to the G20 summit in South Africa. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, write any detailed comment under this video, and also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid subscription. How can you do that? All the details and methods are in the description of this video. It says there, support the channel Alexei Pechi. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support from you.
Good afternoon, dear comrades. Today we have a scheduled exercise on nuclear force management, as just reported by the Minister of Defense. Let's begin our work. Please, the floor is given to the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Vasilievich Gerasimov. Please, Valery Vasilievich.
Comrade Supreme Commander,
the exercise proposes to develop a procedure for authorizing the use of nuclear weapons. Practical actions will be carried out by the mobile ground-based missile system from the State Experimental Airfield Kavese and the strategic nuclear submarine Bryansk of the Northern Fleet from the Barents Sea.
So, on Wednesday, October 22, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, a strategic forces exercise of the Russian Federation was held using all components of the nuclear triad. This is the literal message from the Kremlin press service from the President's Situation Center, where he is sitting alone. Putin gave the order to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles from land, air and sea platforms. The act itself looked amusing because Putin is sitting alone in some kind of bomb bunker and very bravely, even boldly, gives the order to launch a nuclear missile. But for some reason, he hid in a bunker himself instead of standing somewhere at the test site. As a result, an intercontinental ballistic missile Yaz was launched from the Plesets Cosmodrome towards the Kura test range in Kamchatka, with a range of up to 11,000 kilometers, allowing it to reach the territory of the United States of America. And basically, that was the main message, that the missile can attack the territory of the United States. At the same time, from the waters of the Barents Sea, the submarine Bryansk launched a Seneva ballistic missile. And also, the Kremlin stated that two 95 ms long-range aviation aircraft were also involved in the exercise, launching air-launched cruise missiles. And at this point, I'll make a lyrical digression that shows how Putin continues to build these Potemkin villages. On one hand, he demonstrates the power of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and on the other hand, he shows how much the civilian sector is degrading. Meanwhile, Putin is saber-rattling. The Kremlin admitted that the Kazan aircraft plant produced only one Tu-214 aircraft in 2025 instead of the planned 3. But if you're already laughing, just wait. It turned out that this is actually the first aircraft produced since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. In other words, it's the first aircraft in almost 4 years. And that's not all. The Tu-214 aircraft produced this year was actually laid down back in 2019, and only now have they finally managed to assemble it. And you know what? Russian propaganda is telling people about this, talking about this miracle airliner. So, propaganda claimed that by 2030, Russia will produce 113 aircraft. How are they planning to do that? Well, that's an open question. And Russians believe it, and they're already shouting that soon they'll send those Boeings and Airbuses away and will fly on domestic Tu-214 planes which don't exist and never will. But let's get back to Putin's nuclear drills. The purpose of the exercises, as stated by the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, is to practice the procedures for authorizing and using nuclear weapons. But the propaganda has already claimed that this was... But it's telling that Putin reached for the nuclear button the very next day after it became known that Donald Trump indefinitely postponed the summit with the Russian president in Budapest, which he had planned to hold in the next 2 weeks. And according to Reuters sources, the meeting fell through because Putin refused to make any concessions on Ukraine. The Russian president continues to demand the entire territory of Donbas, that Kiev abandon joining NATO, and a radical reduction in the size of the Ukrainian armed forces. Trump himself said the day before that he doesn't want to waste time until he sees progress from both Moscow and Kiev toward a ceasefire. Kyiv stated that they are ready to cease fire at any moment, while Moscow made it clear that there will be no immediate ceasefire. But here's the best part. According to sources in the White House, the person who recommended Trump postpone the summit was Secretary of State Mark Rubio. The day before, he held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, after which he decided that meeting with him to prepare the Trump-Putin summit no longer made sense. And that's the right decision, because Lavrov started saying that the Russians are not going to cease fire. And he stated that the issue is not about Donbass at all, but about all of Ukraine. The Kremlin now seeks to oust the Ukrainian government. Well, that's why the Trump administration believes that Moscow is not ready at all to move forward on negotiations. To reinforce the effect, Putin turned to his partner, not an ally, but specifically the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Something else happened today that many people overlooked. The fact is that North Korea, in parallel with the Russians, launched at least one unidentified ballistic missile toward the East Sea today. The Joint Chiefs of Staff of South Korea stated that the launch was detected but did not provide further details. By the way, this was the first missile launch by North Korea since June, when the new president of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, took office. And here there's a direct message to Donald Trump. The thing is, the launch took place on the eve of South Korea hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, which will be held from October 31 to November 1, and Trump is planning to attend this summit, and there have even been reports that he is ready to meet with Kim Jong-un. So now North Korea and Russia are simultaneously rattling their intercontinental ballistic missiles. And finally, I'll add today's quote from Andrei Kolesnik, a member of the Defense Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation. He states the following: Russia is more ready than ever for a conflict with NATO, especially since, no matter what anyone says, our army is one of the best in the world. At least in terms of combat experience, there is no equal. NATO European leaders are using the threat of war with Russia to distract from domestic issues and stimulate their economies via the military-industrial complex. This is a demonstrative preparation for war and the fueling of military hysteria against Russia. They shouldn't be doing this, because we're not just sitting idly by either. That's how they're driving the escalation. I'll leave it at that. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everyone.